So I'm delighted to participate on this panel. I'm excited to I was just joking this morning with Roy, we have our once-a-year reunion when I'm allowed to come back and be with the Housing Works folks and the folks from the Dallas Fed, so I'm glad to be here. I'm especially excited to be here. I teach an undergraduate course and also a law school course on the middle class, and I'm excited that two of my former students are here. I won't call you out, though I will point at them. They're here. I'm so excited to have them here. They can tell me if I'm saying anything new that I didn't cover in class this year. They actually saw the Lego video in class because I show it. So they met you last spring. They just didn't know they were going to get to meet you now. So the great news about the Pew study that we've heard about sort of that forms the basis of this panel, and there's really only one good thing I can come up with it there being great news, that the middle class is no longer the majority of the families in this country. And that is that at least some people have moved up from the middle class. That's the only positive spin I can put on that. Some of those people are now in the top 19%. And I will say that I don't think of them as the top 19% as being any version of the middle class. And so my joke in class is the upper middle class are just rich folks that don't want to own it. So I will call them middle class, sort of a much smaller economic group. So our panelists are going to talk about how hard it is for low-income Americans, and it's particularly communities of color, to acquire wealth. Without stable income, so we always have to keep in mind the income part. Without income, you can't become wealthy. Without wealth, you can't become and remain middle class. And they're going to propose some concrete things we should think about and maybe implement to help close those gaps. But before they start talking, I want to sort of quickly set the stage so that we understand why we are where we are in terms of the gaping wealth and income inequality gaps that we have in this country. The current problems didn't just develop on their own. I believe, and I love this phrase, I believe we actually had lots of coordinated evil geniuses. I think we continue to have evil geniuses that are creating policies that are creating our current problems. So one of the reasons we have a smaller middle class, and particularly in communities of color, we have a smaller middle class and lower home ownership rates, is because of federal policies like redlining. So we can't ignore where we are now in our communities of color without looking at the role that redlining played. Exclusionary zoning laws. Before the Supreme Court said you can't say blacks can't live here, you can only live there, lots of cities had those zoning laws on the books. Likewise, after the Depression, World War II, when our GIs came back and the GI Bill helped a lot of people buy homes, helped a lot of the GIs go to college. Well, if you were a black GI, you could only buy homes at a high cost, and you couldn't go to a lot of colleges, including the one that employs me and pays my salary. So it's no great surprise that even though our neighborhoods in fact remain racially and economically segregated, even though redlining and the zoning laws are now illegal. No great surprise that blacks in particular have lower college attainment rates, even though colleges can no longer exclude people on the basis of race. No small reason, why are we surprised that we have one of the widest income inequality gaps we've seen since since before the Depression. So the program has very long bios. I will not cover those bios because I know you all have already read them all and digested them. You've done your homework. So I'm just going to present the speakers in the order that they will present, and I'll basically name Widrow, who's the Executive Director of Raise Texas. We have Beeson, who's Chief Executive Office of the Center for Public Policy Priorities. And then we have Lourdes Zuniga, who is Executive Director for the Financial Literacy Coalition of Central Texas, one of our nonprofits in this area. So Woody, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'd like to preface my remarks with a couple of reflections. First, I don't use the term financial literacy, since I believe most low and moderate income families are not financially illiterate. In most cases, they're very financially literate given their income and circumstances. What they lack are targeted financial products designed for their short and long-term needs. Financial education is important, but it's not sufficient. It must be complemented with actual products and services on the ground to help families move to financial success. Second, I acknowledge that having consistent income and a livable wage is a major contributor in the financial instability of most families, and they need better paying jobs. What I want to talk about is the lack of savings. I want to be very micro in my approach of families in Austin and in Texas and nationally. It's not a coincidence that when we look at January, when we had the government shutdown, and we look at the crisis of families who miss one paycheck, and understanding that it was, besides a lot of other things, is a lack of tangible income and tangible savings. So, having savings is one part of wealth creation, and for low-income families and people of color, the lack of what I would call a savings infrastructure, same way we have infrastructure for cars and other types of things, we do not have a savings infrastructure for low-income people and people of color. So, basically, there is a savings crisis in this country. And what research has shown is that how people save is that it's done automatically. It's done in an infrastructural situation, and not done where people each month figure out how much money they're going to have left over at the end of the month and put into savings. So one of the other misconceptions is that poor people can't save and are not interested in saving. And so about 20 years ago, there was this demonstration project, of which many people would know of, which is called the Assets for Independence, which was individual development accounts. It was a match savings program designed for people to save monthly and to be incentivized for a long-term goal in terms of buying a home, starting a business, and post-secondary education. And over a 15-year period, 55,000 families were able to save. About 18,000 bought a new home, 15,000 small business, about 23,000 for post-secondary education. And these 55,000 families saved $70 million. And what's interesting, when you look at it, almost 3/5 of the people were at 150% and below of the federal poverty level. So I think that saving is a part of the thing, as I said, but structurally, we're missing certain types of things. And quickly, one of the biggest barriers is that for people who are on public assistance, specifically on TANF and SNAP, we have an asset limit on it. So on one hand, we want to encourage low-income people to save and to get off public assistance. On the other hand, we have in place an asset limit that if people are saving for some type of long-term goal, it could negatively impact their public benefits. One of the positive things that may be happening, there are a couple of bills in the Texas legislature in this session that could, if passed, create a pilot. There's two major new savings things that's happening. One, that just last month, Raise Texas, working with the United Way and with the Community Foundation in the greater Dallas area, we have now opened up in the Lancaster Independent School District a whole new program that every kindergarten child, we will be opening up a Dollars for College savings account. And we're hoping to move that forward. We have it in Lancaster, happened last month. Next month it's going to be in Richardson. Our goal is that every child, when they start kindergarten, will have a savings account in their name for college. How much would that change the attitude and perception of the child, the parent, the teacher, schools, businesses, and the state of Texas? This could dramatically create more students graduating from 4 or 2-year colleges, universities, or certifications, and getting better paying jobs. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I was kind of looking at the name of our panel, and especially the phrase, building wealth initiatives in our communities, and I was thinking to myself, well, Texas is really rich already. We've got a lot of wealth, right? We need to just remember that, right? If we were a country, we would be the 12th largest economy in the world. So the problem isn't that we don't have wealth. We have plenty of wealth in Texas and here in Austin. The problem is that that wealth, of course, is concentrated in the hands of the very few, right? So I want to talk about a couple of things to build on all the great ideas that I think have been surfaced already here on this panel with Mechele and Woody, and also with all of our earlier great speakers. And I want to talk specifically about wages and the connection between education, of course, and a living wage. Because we can talk about savings, and we can talk about savings all day long, but unless people are making a living wage, families will never be able to save and to build wealth. And we all know, I hope, in this room especially, the historical trends here, and I don't think that they can be overlooked. I mean, the fact of it is, wages have been stagnant in this country since the 1960s. That was like the decade I was born in, you guys, and I am not a young person, okay? That was a long time ago. Too many jobs, this is true nationally, it's even more so true in Texas, do not pay enough to get by. They don't even pay enough to meet basic needs, let alone to save money and build wealth. So just a few figures, because we do love our figures here, right? Yes, Texas is a great job creator. Yes, Texas has a thriving economy. Well, we happen to have the 10th highest rate of low-wage jobs in the country. We happen to be in the top 10 states for income inequality, okay? So I cannot overemphasize the importance of wages and the problem of our minimum wage and just how low it is, right? We have over 31% of jobs in Texas that pay less than $24,000 a year. 400,000 workers, nearly 500,000 workers, make at or below the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. That's more than any other state. And one of the things we like to talk about here in Texas is kind of what we call recession magic. And I've got a slide on this, but this is not a slide kind of conversation, which kind of shows, right, that Texas did a brilliant job of turning a lot of middle income jobs into low wage jobs after the recession. That's what happened, right? We have, thank goodness, a much more kind of public and mainstream conversation about the challenge of the minimum wage. Nationally, we have 29 states that have raised the minimum wage, right? And we have Texas as a major outlier. And not only are we like a big outlier in terms of just how low our wages are and just how resistant many of our leaders are to changing that, we throw up extra barriers, right? Because in other states, before they moved to the state raising the minimum wage above the federal, many cities stepped forward and were leaders and tried to raise the minimum wage, did raise the minimum wage for their workers. Here in Texas, we have a wonderful law on the books that's been on the books for a long time that actually affirmatively prohibits cities and counties from raising the minimum wage. That should be unacceptable. The other day, I was at a panel on education policy, and John King, who's the president of the Education Trust, was talking about the horrible figures, which are so related to this problem of like only 1 in 5 8th graders being able to get a higher ed degree, right? And he said that our hair ought to be on fire about that statistic. Well, I would say the very same thing about the wage issue. Our hair ought to be on fire. It is not okay to have people working more than full-time, working multiple jobs just to meet basic needs. That is at the core, one of the core issues that is driving both income inequality and the inability of low-income people, and especially low-income people of color who are dealing with a deficit to begin with from the racial wealth gap. We're not going to fix these problems unless we fix the wage issue, and that's what I'm going to say for now, and we can get into it more a little later. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. How do you follow Anne, Mechele, and Woody, right? What I wanted to talk about today it's something that is very telling to me about where we are in as far as financial education and financial capability, which is what I call it. Woody and I talk a lot about this, and financial literacy is only a portion of the problem. And I like to think about as financial capability, but a lot of people, funders and stakeholders I talk to always say, what are you talking about? What is financial capability? It's a more wholesome term. It's a more inclusive term. And the three components of the financial capability is, first, the knowledge, which we deliver in my organization and other ones, through financial education, through different methods that we want people to understand what the financial industry offers in terms of credit, savings, loans, you name it. More and more people are excited to know. There's a lot of young millennials that are thirsty for knowing how to manage their assets. But we have a big problem. The statistics, not just the FINRA ones, but all the other ones are pretty scary as far as 70% of millennials are terrified of retirement. They don't really know what they're going to do. Yeah. So that's a scary, there's an incredible amount of students that graduate college with over $40,000 on loans. Mm-hmm. And so it's a common practice. It's expected to have a loan when you're going to get higher education, right? So that's kind of one aspect of the capability. The other one is the behavior and the skills. When you talk about this, people say, is it a financial problem, a behavior and skills that psychologically something that you think about? Yes, it is. Finances are personal. It gets determined by different aspects in your life. When you're ready to make a decision, are you able to manage your assets throughout your life in a daily basis? Are you able to adjust your budget? That's a skill set that is not necessarily just a spreadsheet. You have to know how to not be impulsive when you're doing groceries, how to, be diligent, and how to erase habits you grew up with. A lot of two-generation type of models that we're exploring nowadays said that kids can learn all they want in school, but they go home and the parents are like, oh, don't worry about that. That's just not even important. That's a problem because kids are looking at their parents as their role models. And if they dismiss something, they probably think it's not as important. So the last one is the access to resources, and that's the one that I really like to emphasize. Raise your hand who are here social services providers, nonprofits. A few, okay. So the first two components are crucial in what we do. We deliver these services, we educate people, we try to deliver through the emergency experiences that our clients have. The access, those are the stakeholders that are the bankers, financial advisors, policymakers. We can teach all we want our clients to be diligent about their budgets, to be conscious about how they spend, to learn how to choose a credit card. But if the systems of inequity are there, if we continue perpetuating the systems of racism, we're going to perpetuate the cycles of poverty. If we teach and have someone ready to make decisions, but the systems don't allow them to make those decisions, our job is a waste of time. So the call of action today is let's collaborate together. We can deliver the services, we can get funding by many organizations, but we need to make sure that our policymakers, we need to make sure that the people that provide those services bridge that gap, language, cultural, whatever it is. But those rich parts of our city have to be spread out. And if we continue to have only the elite having wealth and perpetuating these systems of inequity, then we're going to continue having this problem and continue to talk about these inequities in our society. Thank you.
I found it fascinating that the first part of your talk, Woody, was on financial literacy. So we start with financial literacy or financial capability, and then we end with financial literacy and capability. So I'm wondering, what do you think is the difference between financial literacy, which at least a few years ago was all the buzz, that will solve all of the problems, the difference between financial literacy and financial capability?
Well, financial literacy is just the knowledge, and financial capability is when a person is ready to make a financial decision, an informed financial decision, when they're, what we call life events. Nobody plans to get a divorce. Women, more so, stay in a relationship of abuse. We deal a lot of that with our partners, through a couple of nonprofits where, even if they're in a situation of violence, but they're not financially independent. So they continue in that relationship because that's their safety net. So financial capability is a concept where and anyone can memorize 2 and 2 equals 4, but are you ready to make a decision when it comes to, in your life, there's a moment that you need to make a decision. And that's purchasing a home, going to higher education, having a baby, getting a divorce, you can name it. Financial capability is when a person is ready to endure life and whatever comes with it in a responsible and informed way.
I'm going to toss a question to you, Ann. So we've talked a lot, both this morning and generally, about debts and how debts relate to families' ability or inability to accumulate wealth. So I'm wondering, what types of debts do you think are most preventing lower income families from being able to become and remain middle class?
I definitely want to talk about college debt in this context, right? Because this is another thing that's changed dramatically, and even more so here in Texas over the last couple of decades, right? Where the cost of college has skyrocketed and the amount of financial aid available has continued to decrease and decrease, right? And, again, I hate to bring it back to the personal, but, but sometimes it's the easiest way to tell the story, right? When I went to college, I left home. My parents never paid a dime. They didn't have it to pay for me to go to college. I was able to get a job, pay my rent, buy my food, pay all of my tuition, and actually save money. I'm not making this up, with like what was basically a minimum wage job. Now that just seems like crazy pie in the sky. It's not pie in the sky. It actually used to exist, right? And so, when we see this, right, and when we see that the only real path to the higher paying jobs, the above minimum wage jobs, is a higher education degree, and then we throw up more barriers, with college debt, you're going to just see, again, the racial wealth gap perpetuated. You're going to see entrenched, inequality continue. So I would say, absolutely one of the policy priorities has to be to get the state to increase its share of investment in higher education, to invest heavily in community colleges. I completely agree. I think it was Richard Reeves that said, community colleges are doing God's work. And unfortunately, let's talk policy, right up the street at the Capitol just yesterday, one of our Senate subcommittees, passed passed out of committee a law that would prohibit cities and counties, another preemption law, from regulating in any way the employer-employee relationship around things like paid sick leave, all sorts of other issues. So instead of going the right direction to sort of improve things, we keep throwing up more barriers to sort of hold back low-income people.
So one of the greatest things that I have with working for UT is I never have to do the disclaimer that nothing that I say actually represents the University of Texas the way that you do when you work for the Federal Reserve. So I'm going to pick on higher ed for a moment. So it is virtually impossible now for a student to, you hear the term work their way through college. You can't work your way through college anymore. And if you work more than 25 or 30 hours a week, what that then means is you will never graduate. You'll not just be on the 5 or 6 year plan, you'll be on the 15-year plan, and your grades will suffer. And the other thing that we have to be honest about, and this somewhat sort of ties into the opportunity or the dream hoarding that we heard about this morning, are there's been a very distinct shift in the way that financial aid works now in the colleges, both public and private. Not so much anymore need-based. It's much more, merit-based, sort of the term meritocracy this morning. So we are giving children of means an even greater opportunity to attend college because a lot of the scholarships are merit-based, and we're not really doing much, or as much as we used to to help students who are lower income with need-based scholarships, so then they have to go into debt.
Absolutely, and I do just have to give a little plug. Our terrific policy analyst, Ashley Williams, just in the last couple of weeks has put out a 3-part series called Degrees of Debt, which is all about the college affordability crisis and focuses in particular on supposed non-traditional students, which are really the majority of college students, and the challenges that they have paying for college. So really encourage you all to look at that. Yeah.
So you mentioned in your talk sort of Lancaster, the sort of K-12 college savings plans.
Right.
Are there other products that you know of or familiar with that can sort of help make savings, to strengthen the savings infrastructure, the term that you used, and sort of make savings more fun?
Well, I mean, we need to come up with ways in looking at jobs. Most people who save is through their employer. But if you look at, for our target population, the infrastructure is not designed in such a way so that we can automatically, through payroll deductions and other things. I mean, again, I preface all of this to say that people need more income. But I also want to say that just because you have more income doesn't mean you still will save and make good decisions. Too many people, when they get more income, spend more. And and the other thing is, if you understand how people save, and as I said, very few people have the structure within themselves that if they're getting $500 a week or something, very few people at the end of the week or something have money left over and say, I will use that money to put in a savings account. And so if you study behavioral economics, you understand that much of the savings happens when it's done automatically. And so that's why I say the infrastructure is that the other thing I just want to preface it, savings is not fun. Savings is not sexy. Savings isn't something, as I tell people, when you go to a party, how many people talk about savings at a party? And if you do, will people go, that's exciting? Or will they go to speak to somebody else? So part of this thing is, and how do you build a savings culture in Texas or in Austin? And so there are ways to make it more fun and things like that, but beyond the fun side, we need to make it that it's automatically done.
I'd like us to take questions from the audience, but I'm actually going to, if we have time, do we have time? Okay, so I want to take questions from the audience and also from the computer thingy that shows us questions. But I'm going to raise a question that someone that I saw posted earlier this morning that I'm going to use. And it is, for the panelists, do you think that financial literacy classes, however you want to define them, you can define them as financial capability, financial literacy, do you think they should be mandatory? And I don't know what the person that wrote the question meant. As I define mandatory is mandatory in a star testing kind of a way.
Well, they do have it already now. It was passed around 2013 or 2015. That is mandated financial education in the K through 8 system. And starting in 4th grade, it is tested. All I can say is, yes, as I prefaced when I was saying it, I do think information is important and financial education is important. The problem I have, if it's a standalone thing, and I testified in front of the Texas legislature, this was around payday lending, and so we've created financial education that people who are taking out a payday loan or in front of that basically say, what a stupid decision you've just made in paying 500% for this loan. And so I don't think necessarily having that information and leaving it like that will make people make better decisions. And that's where I say we need the infrastructure and products that if most of Texans or most of Austin had $500 or $2,000 in a savings account, very few people would need to go to a payday lender, and very few people would have the crisis that we're seeing in a lot of those situations.
Questions? Since I don't have any on the slidey, rolly thingy here.
Cloud. We talk a lot about helping the lower and less fortunate come up in the public education system and in the college system, but are so many opportunities where there's a middle-class family who is struggling to make their ends meet, and they just qualify for no financial aid. And how is that setting that middle class who are working so hard to grow and preserve? How are we setting them up for success when you graduate with $80,000 in student debt for a job that you're prepared for?
Those we have got to just start advocating again, just as we're doing in the K-12 context, right, for stronger state investment. It's just a little bit of a no-brainer. It's smart investment to invest in, in both our K-12 system and our higher ed system in a way that, especially targets students most in need. I definitely hear what you're saying about, I think the first priority is absolutely to return to more need-based aid so that the students that need it the most are getting it. But we need to look at the whole thing because you don't want to be excluding, as you say, middle-class families from being able to move forward, with an affordable college degree as well. So.
And I think that when I would talk about children's savings accounts, I mean, part of the misconception is we're losing a lot of parents and children too early in terms of, and by the time they realize the cost of it, it's too late. So that's why I said, if we had a children's savings account, every child in Austin, every child in Texas, we open up an account. We've worked on, in Lancaster now, we've developed 4 lessons, because one of the other challenges we found is with teachers, is that we found, not surprisingly, many teachers felt uncomfortable talking about the topic because they had their own financial crisis in their own life. So we developed 4 lessons specifically for kindergarten teachers. We did a train-the-training. And so it's teaching that, and it's starting early and starting to talk to kids. What do you want to be when you grow up? We have some parent type of interaction. And so it's changing the attitude and perception. And I think the other thing is, if you start looking at the job skills, we want everybody to go to, the best 4-year colleges, but a lot of the good paying jobs in 2020 and 2030, you may only need to go to a community college, you might need trade school, certification, and when you start looking at that, and it also starts the ball rolling much earlier into what it costs to pay. And one of the statistics I think is revealing. It shows that as little as $500 in a children's savings account makes you 3 times more likely to go to college.
And to add to that, it's also, when you start early, there is a lot that people don't understand once they're in the problem. But if you're proactive enough to learn while you are a child and get familiar, they say financial education is like a language. If you don't, no one can say, I'm done. I know everything I need to know about this. No, that's something that you acquire that throughout the years. And, just to mention one thing, one of the tools that we use in our organization is the Navigate curriculum, which is career readiness. And kids are fascinated by it because it explains them that it's not just paying for tuition, it's paying for their movies, their laundry. That didn't magically happen to any of us. We have to pay for it. But kids don't know that that's part of a budget. They don't know that if they get a bachelor's degree, they're going to earn less than if they get a PhD. They don't know that college is not the only option. They can go to a community college. But how do we transfer that knowledge from generation to generation if the previous generation has not had access to that? So that's what's important, is the access that we give. We can talk about all the things that we can execute, but if we don't have the systems in place and the policies that allow minority groups to access to those resources, then we can just go in circles and continue this, right?
I want to follow up a little bit on the sort of piggybacking the financial education piece that we talked about a few moments ago. And I always hate to be the cynic, but here we go. I have 2 children who were proud products of AISD. The one is now a freshman in college, the other is a 10th grader. And the college freshman, I made him take every single financial education course that his school offered. And what his younger brother was learning that was required was nothing near what he needed to actually become financially literate, to have the sort of information that you were just mentioning. And so although I think it's better than nothing that we do have the financial education requirement, at some point we'll need to somewhat start looking at content to make sure that it does focus on you can, because most people are shocked when they hear that a person that has a PhD earns less. So there are some instances where actually getting a higher degree doesn't help you. The other thing I'll mention about sort of the whole issue with higher ed, and you need to have a college degree, we've got to put some of that blame back on the employers. I mean, we have gotten to the point now where a college degree is being used as the sifter. So it's not that you actually need a college degree for the skills that you have to perform in the job, but the employers would prefer that you have a college degree. And I've heard all of the reasons why. Well, the fact that you stuck with something for 4 years suggests that you'll be a good employee, and that's all fine and well and good. But when you look at the people who are more likely to have a college degree, we are perpetuating a certain level of inequality, both class-based and, more importantly, race-based. So although I think I'm a strong proponent of, when I say trade schools, I don't mean those horrible for-profits, but sort of trade schools that actually give you a skill that you can then use and earn income. I'm a huge proponent of community colleges, but we can all agree that that's great. But if employers are still going to use a BA as the cutoff, then having that community college degree is still not going to accomplish what we would hope it would accomplish.
And then there's another question that actually talks about, the role of the for-profit organizations in this issue, and goes back to that racial conversation we have that the mayor started in this initiative that, we talk about this on my leadership program. Why are employers not hiring diversity? We see this often where I sat at a table with 10 people and 8 of them said, I don't have people of color in my job. I don't see them, so I don't think it's a problem. That's a problem. Why are we not including people of color in why are the HR directors not hiring? Don't see that as a problem. So that's the inequity and inequalities that we're dealing with, that we're not sharing the wealth. Austin is a wealthy city, but it's only for the elite, right?
Well, and I'll just build on that and say, in terms of the private sector question, that obviously the private sector has a huge role to play, and we could fix this problem if the private sector would just do the right thing. Let's be clear. And I really think that we need better systems, frankly, to reward and celebrate those employers who actually are doing the right thing. And we've got some big companies that are moving in that direction. And I'll tell you, I got a son, freshman in college, right? Lots of money to send him to college. He's responsible for 25% of it. We came up with a plan. That's the rule. So he's working. He worked over Christmas break, and when he came home and he was trying to get a seasonal job, yes, they still exist, seasonal jobs. He had a couple of different options, and he was like, Target was one of them, and I'm like, absolutely go work for Target. You know why? Because Target is committed to getting up to $15 an hour as their lowest wage, by I think next year, and they're already paying $14 an hour. So go Target. I mean, seriously. I mean, we need to send our friends and our kids to these employers who are doing the right thing. I will also say there was a question about, what is the impact of raising wages on overall employment? This is a classic question and conversation. There have been boatloads, literally, of studies done on this. We have a policy paper that came out a couple of years ago called It's Time to Raise the Minimum Wage in Texas. And it's got a whole analysis of every single one of those studies. And I will just give the headline, which is that by far the majority of peer-reviewed studies show that there is negligible impact on overall employment from raising the minimum wage. In fact, the opposite tends to occur. And it only makes sense. I'm not an economist, right? I'm just like a loud advocate, I suppose you could say. But it only makes sense that if people are kind of making more money, they're spending more money, hopefully they're saving. Woody's absolutely right. Saving is not the sexy part, but it's the important part. Mm-hmm. But the fact of it is, it helps the entire economy. It helps everyone when wages are higher.
So I'm going to go to the first question, because it's a dilemma, right? We've spent a lot of time, I focus only talking about the middle class, and sort of middle-skilled jobs, the high-wage middle-skilled jobs that used to exist 40 or 50 years ago was the pathway to the middle class. The challenge is, in every city, the fastest growing sector of jobs are low-skilled service jobs. Mm-hmm. So sort of how do we deal with that disconnect?
Well, one of the ways you deal with it is by raising the minimum wage, obviously. So all of those people are making a living wage, I'm again not the expert to talk about this, but unfortunately there's a whole conversation too about how those are the jobs most likely to disappear through automation, right? And so that gets us into a whole other conversation about the future of the workforce and what that needs to look like. So.
Well, I think that in a way we're dealing with that in a very small way, and it's worth highlighting the people that are working on that. We have our partners of the Housing Authority, the City of Austin, through the job class, and they have done a fantastic job. Thank you, Michael and Barbara and Leilani, that are continuously worrying about how can they equip their residents with skills that they can use that might not take a lot. And so I shout out to them for putting these type of jobs as a priority and making sure that they have the tools they need. And we, as partners, we feel very blessed and honored to be a part of those efforts. The Navigate curriculum I was talking about with the developed by the Federal Reserve, thank you to them for providing those resources and making them available. And I think that for us here in this room that are people in corporations to support those efforts and to make sure that those resources, because they are unfunded, are available to them and really highlight the positive and stories and the success stories that they have. And I talk to them every time I go to their classes, and it's amazing to see how much they are grateful for that opportunity to get a job when they couldn't before.
So the last question, because we're down to 5 minutes, that I want to throw out for the panelists, and it's a kind of a prickly one. So we talk a lot about increasing the minimum wage. We talk a lot about a living wage. But at the minimum wage, you're nowhere near being middle income or middle class. I think it's $15,000 to $17,000 a year at the federal. Even with a living wage, you're at sort of the bottom part of the middle class. So my question is, how, when we're talking to people and trying to advocate in favor of increasing the minimum wage or providing a living wage, how is that then going to make it more likely that people will shift into the middle class and then stay in the middle class?
I mean, I think I'm not completely understanding your question, Michelle, because you're saying even if you raise the wage to $15 an hour, right, which is I think where the conversation is now, right? Are you going to get people a whole lot closer? I mean, maybe they wouldn't be in the middle class, maybe they'd be at the upper end, but they'd be a whole lot closer to it than they are now when they're literally, living in poverty by the federal definition at the minimum wage level.
Right.
So, I definitely think I don't think it's the only answer at all. It's just the one that, that I'm throwing out there now, and I think there needs to be a number of other great policy ideas. And one of the many great papers out there that I would recommend is well, they've done so many, but Demos around with a whole set of terrific policy recommendations about how to reduce the racial wealth gap. And they include raising the minimum wage, they include affordable college, but they also include some great other ideas about how to kind of close that wealth gap. So yeah.
I think it's, again, is not, as Ann said, it's not one thing. And I think raising the minimum wage just gives you more income. I'm not saying, right, it's, there's the slogan, getting by and getting ahead. And so we need to get to the point that people are slightly getting ahead, that they don't have to count on going to the food pantry. They don't have to count on public assistance. And so we need to get it so that, again, in behavioral economics, there's a book that talks about stress. Financial stress, besides the psychological, it has a physical effect on your life. And so when you are stressing how you're going to pay for food and things like that, there's no way you're going to move forward. And so financially stable, and understanding that, and getting out of the debt cycle, and then we could start having financial coaches have a plan for people. But it's moving it up the ladder, and then all the other things is that once you get above that basic living wage, you have to move up. I mean, some of it is structural, and I mean, again, from the early panels and stuff, I mean, to be blunt, we're in a capitalist system. And given the type of structure that we're in, and given the state of Texas, we have a double challenge in terms of the role of government at the federal and state level could help us out.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to come up with specific policies, as Anne's talking about, there are some state policies, there are government policies, and then there's private sector initiatives. And the only things we have control a little bit now, a lot more, are the private initiatives type of thing, and trying to move public sector in the right direction.
Do we have time for one more question? Are we done? Okay, so we have a question back here.
Something that I grapple with in my head is this idea of increasing the income for some people, when I think that there are always going to be people who have less. So how can we make it easier to be poor? How can we make the whole system more accommodating and safer and more loving? Make it easier to find have a home, to get food, to get to your job, so that we don't have to be wealthy. Like, why this emphasis on wealth when we should have an emphasis on facilitating life? Because we shouldn't have to have an income of a certain level to have those accesses to those privileges.
So the response that my students would give, at least two students that I'm thinking of in particular right now, is we have to move away from what we have come to accept as a pure capitalist system. There are things that we don't provide in this country that in other countries there's a greater safety net. Mm-hmm. When I taught this class, the middle class course last spring, I had several students in the class who were not U.S. students, they were exchange students, and they thought that it was the most bizarre thing when we kept talking about retirement and jobs and medical care and jobs. And they said, why do you people keep talking about your jobs and what does that have to do with how you get medical insurance and retirement? And it never occurred to them that that's just the way we roll in the U.S. And so for us to really make it possible for people of very limited means to have what we would think of as I would say a humane lifestyle, is we've got to do a little bit more pushing on our local, state, and federal governments to provide more than what we currently provide as a government, and that we push off onto the employers.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I would just say, that the reason that well, first of all, I would just say that when the kind of wealth, we've been using the term wealth up here as like minimum ability to meet your most basic needs in life, housing, food. We're not talking about like putting money in the bank.
Funds.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's just one
Emergency
thing, but the other,
savings.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But,
it's just to have enough to live a comfortable life without stressing out, as Woody pointed out, and point out, the definition. I think a speaker before said that, when we talk about wealth, we're not talking about just having like $1 million on my bank account so I can live it up and go to Vegas. Be're talking about basic needs and live a comfortable life, having access to homes and decent life without being under the lines of poverty.
We are out of time. I'd like you to join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you all so very much. That was a wonderful presentation. Another big round of applause. Thank you again.